everybody, it's Dana here today on the Hero Arts channel. Thanks so much for joining me. Today we're going to be making a holiday card. We're going to be using the Merry Poinsettia bunch. I love the large floral design of this, and this is going to help us make a very nice Christmas card. I'm also going to use red royal ink, and I'm also going to use some brass embossing powder because we're going to do a little bit of heat embossing. So let's go ahead and get started. I went ahead and placed my stamp into my MISTI, and I've already treated a piece of cherry cardstock with my anti-static bag. I can place that into my MISTI, and again, like I said, we're going to be doing some heat embossing, so I will grab my embossing ink. This is the Watermark embossing ink, also from Hero Arts, and I'm making sure to apply this heavy-handedly to the stamp. Anytime you're doing heat embossing, you want to try to get a really good impression before you start adding your embossing powder. So you see that I have a tool here and I'm really pressing it into the paper. Once you have this stamp, you just really want to make sure you have your entire image on your paper, because once you start putting on that embossing powder, you're not going to be able to restamp this. So I just want to give my stamp a little bit more ink one more time, and then just make sure I get a really seamless stamped image. Once I have that image stamped and I can totally see that all the lines are covered, I can go ahead and remove that from my MISTI, and then I'm going to bring in a scratch piece of paper and that brass embossing powder. Now you could totally do this in gold as well, but I don't have a tendency to use my brass embossing powder a lot, so I figured, you know, for my holiday cards this year, I'm going to break that out and I'm going to start using it a little bit more. I'll go ahead and tap off the excess, and if I have any strayed bits, I can use a dry paintbrush just to knock back any of that gold that is sticking to that paper. Once I have it all covered, I can go ahead and start heat setting this. Now, I do want to make sure that my gun is nice and hot. My heat tool is nice and hot for this. That's for two reasons. One, it's going to melt the embossing powder a little bit quicker. And two, if your heat tool is nice and warm when you bring it to the paper, you're going to get less bowing in your paper. So as you can see, I'm hand checking it real quick to make sure it's nice and hot. And then when I bring it to my paper, it's going to end up melting that embossing powder a little bit quicker. And I do like to heat from the front and the back when I'm doing heat embossing. Once that is completed and I have my design done, I mean, look how gorgeous that brass looks on that cherry cardstock. Again, you could use silver or gold on this, but I wanted to show some love to that brass embossing powder. I think it just looks perfect for this holiday design. I mean, look how gorgeous that is. Now, I did go ahead and stamp this one more time because I want to do a little bit of a technique here. So this is the second one that I stamped out. And I want to make just those two flowers, those poinsettias, a little bit of a darker red. And I can achieve this by doing some ink blending over it. Now, if you wanted to, you could also use your Copic markers or color pencils, but this makes it really, really quick. So I have that red royal ink and my blending brush, and I'm just building up that color. Like I said, I just want those two flowers to be a little bit more darker than the red that I have of my paper. And by doing this, starting off with the red, I don't have to blend as much because my paper is already red. So when you're starting off with colored cardstock and you're using a colored ink that's a shade bit darker, it requires you to have less effort to get that color. So once I have that color on there, I do want to bring in my little rag and wipe off that ink from the top of that embossing powder. This is just going to remove any of that residue, and I'll be able to have crisp lines. I do want to go in one more time right towards the bottom of that flower. I want to make sure I have this all done before I go on to my next step. Once I have the ink where I need it to be, I'm going to grab a pair of scissors and I'm just going to cut on the gold line right around those two flowers. Those are going to be my accent pieces for my card base. I went ahead and I trimmed these out, and as you can see that this is just a tad bit darker, but this is going to be a beautiful element on this card. Now it's time to add in a sentiment. I'm going to have a top folding card. So I'm going to place my card panel where my sentiment is going to be right below that gorgeous spray that's going across the page. I do make sure to treat this paper as well, and I'm going to use that Merry Christmas. I'll line that right up across the bottom. Now let me give you a couple tips here. If you wanted to make multiples of this card, I think that would be a great way to get a lot of your holiday cards done. My suggestion is change up your color palette and also change up your embossing powder. So maybe make a few in red, maybe some in green, maybe some in navy. I think black and gold would be absolutely stunning. So those are just some ways that you can recreate this card, but just in a different color tone. Again, if you're going to be mass producing, I would stamp all of the floral images at once, heat emboss those, come back and heat emboss your sentiments. This way you kind of get more in an assembly line. And you can also at that point cut out all of your extra flowers, make sure you have those all inked up. So when you start the card making process, you're not hopping back and forth between your projects. You'll have like one card done and then you can just keep that moving. I went ahead and I used that same brass embossing powder to use for my sentiment. I am being careful to put this back into the jar because I have been known to knock this over on my desk. Again, I'm making sure that I get my heat tool nice and hot before I bring it to my paper. Now, because I had already used this, my gun is kind of warm still, so it's not going to take much for me to melt this embossing powder. And again, that one little trick of heating from the back and then coming back to the front. It does make a difference on how your embossing powder melts, and you don't have to use so much heat, and so it does not warp your paper. So now we have this beautiful card panel, and look how great that brass looks on there. I just really can't say that enough. It's such a great alternative to just having gold. Now once I have that there, I do want to trim down this panel just a little bit because I want to put this onto a white card base. So sometimes you can stamp your image and have the paper already trimmed down. But for me, sometimes I like to go ahead and stamp the image before I trim it down. Now I'm just trimming this down about 1/4 of an inch on the top and the sides in order to have a nice white card base. Now you can make this a full-size card panel, which would be an A2 4¼ by 5½. But for me, for my holiday cards, sometimes I just like to have that white little border around my focal point. Now I can bring back in those flowers, and I'm going to use some foam tape to give this a little bit of dimension. Again, I'm not adding a lot to this card, so I just want certain parts of things to stand out. And by doing those flowers and having them popped up off my card, that's going to give my design a little bit of dimension, but not too much. You can also offset these flowers so it looks like there might be more to this sprig, but I'm going to place them right on top of the ones that are already there. But again, I'm going to have some dimension with this. It will also be pretty cool if you put them on tiny little action wobblers. I didn't think about that. I might have to do that for a different card. Okay, now I can go ahead and set that aside and we can start working on our card base. So for the card base, like I said, I'm doing a standard card size, which is a A2, which is 4¼ by 5½. And I am going to make this a top folding card. I do like to use a scoring board for this. It kind of just makes the creases of my cards a little bit better. But if you don't have a scoring board, don't fear, just fold your cardstock in half and then just use a Teflon bold folder in order to get a good crease. I just like to go back over mine just to make sure I have a nice sharp edge there. Now we can go ahead and start building up this card. So as you can see, I like to have that white little border right around the edge. And I'm just going to adhere this down with my extra large Hero Arch Precision Glue. And this is going to give me a tad bit of wiggle room in order to set this on straight. Of course, when we're making those holiday cards, we want to make sure we get them as perfect as possible before we send them out. But again, if yours is a little off, I wouldn't sweat it because it's the creativity that people like, not if your card is straight. Just my opinion, just saying. Once I have that down, I do want to add a little bit more of an element to this. I don't want to add bulk. I just want to add a little bit more shimmer to this card because, you know, it's a holiday card and that's what we live for. We live for the shimmer. So I'm going to grab my Rose Gold Glimmer Metallic ink. I'm just going to take a little bit of that and just put it on my glass mat. This is going to add a little bit of a rose gold sparkle to my card, and the rose gold and the brass work lovely together. The first thing I want to do is kind of mix that up, and then I want to fill in the centers of my flowers first. So I'll get a good amount of that onto my paintbrush, and then I can go ahead and dab it in where the center of those berries would be. I think adding just a touch of rose gold to that is so pretty. And look at the dimension. It really does make a difference on the card. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of water. I just want to loosen up that metallic ink so I can make some splatter on my card. Again, this is just one of those simple touches you can do to add to a card without adding a lot of dimension. And when I say this rose gold looks so pretty with this brass, it totally does. It totally steps up this holiday card. Once I have enough on there, that is going to be our card for today, you guys. Look how beautiful and simple that card was. All right, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Don't forget to subscribe right here to the Hero Arch channel, and I will see you back here soon. Until then, everybody, have a great day and take care.